Welcome to the Carey Nieuwhof Leadership Podcast on YouTube. My name is Carey Nieuwhof, and my goal is to help you lead like never before. So what I do every week is I sit down with world-class leaders and church leaders, business leaders, and I talk to them about what made them who they are and try to have the conversation with them that you would have if you got to sit down for lunch with them or have dinner with them or really got to spend some time with them. So we go into the backstory and we explore what made them who they are and some of the principles they've learned along the way. So if you enjoy this episode, I would love for you to like it, to subscribe, and also to share it with your friends. And in the meantime, here's today's episode. Well, Brad Lomenick, welcome, my friend. Good to have you back.
Carey Nieuwhof, always fun to be on your show, on the podcast. I mean, this feels like old hat. It feels like we're just getting it together for lunch.
I know. Well, you and I mean, you help out our team with little projects and usually end up on a round table, right? We do something for Rethink Leadership or whatever, but we just got Brad locked in and loaded on this podcast live from Oklahoma. Is that right?
I am in Oklahoma, yes, today. So
the international man of mystery. Sometimes you move.
Well, there is this. My reality the last several years was spending a lot of time on planes. And
you and me both.
Obviously that changed, but there's almost it's starting to creep back in, Carey. I don't know about you, but I'm sort of itching to get back out on the road. Are you? Are you sort of like, I'm good?
I would have said if you asked me, so we're recording this in September, a few weeks before air. It was just at the end of August where I thought, I really need to see my friends face to face. Like we need to go and have a meal together. But like airports and time zones. And the crazy thing is I was good at it. Like I had a system. And if you asked me in February, are you living the dream? I would have been like, I just don't know whether it gets any better. And then of course the world shuts down and all the tragedy around us and everything. But from a personal perspective, being home for the last 6 months has been very life-giving to the point where I think my travel will be greatly reduced in the future. So.
You found a new rhythm with biking and hanging out outside and cooking on your big green egg. I mean, you found a new part of life that you knew was there, but now you're like leaning into it.
Well, my team are telling me they really think I'm a better boss. And they said just not taking calls, while you're trying to board a flight or, here's the time zone I'm in. Can you meet me at 7 p.m.? They're like, if you're just available. And I said, so is it like a different, like, am I better? And they're like, no, you're just around. And that is a lot of leadership, isn't it? You need to be around. It's a lot of parenting. You need to be around. It's a lot of marriage. You need to be around. And now I'm just around. So kind of like being around.
I think the thing too that I've learned, the last 4 or 5 months is obviously we're all trying to pivot and figure out things and shift and redo our structures and the way we get work done. But trying to find a sense of joy and contentment in the new reality, because reality is like we have to do that. I mean, in order to sort of embrace a hopeful expectation of today and tomorrow, we've got to look at it and go, well, how do I find some sense of just peace and contentment in this new season? And
where's that coming from for you?
Well, a lot of it is almost fighting back the fear. It's almost that sense of how do you take away the negative vibes and the sense of the sky's falling, like, my world is collapsing. What do I do? I'm just going to go stick my head in the sand. Compared to, again, like new reality, which was I'm stuck. So what does that create from an opportunity perspective for me to get better? And it is getting better as a leader, like coming out on the other side of this. Levi said that on Church Pulse Weekly, the idea of, are we going to be better on the other side? But also, can I enjoy the process to get there? And it's taking more time to, just one example for me is like, I'm in a place where I have access to the outdoors. And, even the few pictures I put on Instagram the last several months were primarily hunting and fishing.
Yeah.
And I'm finding joy and contentment in some of those pieces where, again, before that would have felt like a distraction, or it would have felt like sideways energy.
Well, you
even though
should
I
have
knew
been
it was
somewhere
important.
else. Mm-hmm.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Gosh,
So
I should have been
that's
working
true
on
for
this
people.
project. Yeah.
That's true for people with, with obviously people homeschooling, or, their kids are at home, they're
Yeah.
virtual learning. Like, how do we lean into that compared to seeing it as this, if we're honest, it's a lot of pressure and it's a lot of stress. And so I'm just trying to take that perspective.
That's good. I kind of had, it's not really a hobby. That's an exaggeration because there are actual birders listening to this podcast, but put a bird feeder up in the backyard this summer. And I've been trying to identify bird calls. And
I like it.
yeah, it was really cool. And it was funny. We were out camping with my family recently, and we're paddling back to shore, which is a 3.5-hour paddle with portages and the whole deal. And I see this giant bird sitting in a tree. It's a hawk. Like, how often do you see a hawk sitting in a tree? And we just kind of slowed down, watched the hawk for a little while. Those are massive birds. And then I heard the call. And I'm like, I know that call. They're in my neighborhood. I live near Hawkstone, Ontario. Okay. So like there are hawks everywhere, but I'd never connected the call with the bird. I think that is, and I don't know why, but that is like stupidly pleasure giving to me to be able to, I'll just be walking, in the woods and I'll go, oh, that's a cardinal. Oh, that's a chickadee. Oh, now I know that's a hawk. And so I didn't know that prior to March.
Yeah, you and Carlos Whitaker are now.
Is he a birder?
Oh gosh, look at his Instagram feed.
Well, he's got that whole Robin thing going and all that stuff,
yes,
right?
Yeah.
He
and Heather both are they're deep into the vortex of bird, not just bird watching, but like bird. I guess you could say like bird parenting.
Yeah, bird.
Right.
Yeah.
And Clay Scroggins, our buddy Clay, like he's talking about reduce the noise.
Mm-hmm.
In his book, so if we reduce the noise, we can hear more of God. And I think that's what's happening for all of us.
No, that's good. Well, we're going to get into that, but I don't want to go too much further into the interview without saying, congrats, you got a brand new podcast, which is awesome.
Yes.
Brad, so H3 Leadership came out when? 2015?
Yes. To a lot of people, they go, what? I thought it just came out like last month.
I know.
Yes, it's now almost.
But you and I released a book around the same time, I think, in 2015, fall of 2015. And now 5 years later, the H3 Leadership Podcast debuts. Wherever you can find podcasts on the Thrivicity network, which is...
first of all, the network is also really exciting.
Mm-hmm.
You're the lead dog or the lead horse in our stable. But we've got a new network that's going to have not just mine, but now others that will be joining. So that's very exciting.
That's something we have been talking about in my little company for a while, starting a podcast network. So you are our first show other than my leadership podcast, this show in the Thrivicity network, spark growth, right? That's what we want to do. We want to spark growth. And so, but tell us about your podcast. Because when you were pitching the idea, I thought, I don't know of another podcast like this, because I don't know of anybody else quite like Brad Lomenick. So that's fun. And, but it's so quintessentially you. And I want you to sort of vision cast for leaders what they can expect when they subscribe to H3 Leadership.
Well, a lot of people have read the book. So, the book is not necessarily the lead story of the podcast. It's more of my brand.
Right. It's not you reading your book. It's not the audio book.
Right. Exactly. But here's what it is. It's curated. So the power of curation, which is me helping leaders know about the things they need to know about. So if you think about, me curating the best books you need to read, the links you need to know about with great articles, the videos you should watch, the podcasts you should listen to, the events you need to attend, the organizations that should be on your radar, the young influencers that you are not aware of but should be. It's all of that. And, it's going to be weekly. And it's going to be practical. It's going to be shorter than this interview.
You're not doing 2.5 hour marathons that other people do.
Gordon McDonald. Yeah.
No Gordon McDonald.
That's right. But what I'm going to try to do is just every week bring something that's helpful that you can go find or listen to or watch or review, that day. And the idea of having a curated podcast, like you said, I'm a podcast junkie. I don't know of anybody else doing that. And I think it's going to be helpful because that's what I need. I actually need somebody to curate for me.
For the several hundred of all the leaders listening, let's just assume there's several hundred who know you well enough to be on your personal email list. So I would be one of those people. And every once in a while, Brad just shoots out to his friends this like long, not particularly well formatted email with all these links of the most interesting, like I keep them in Evernote. They're so good. But these really great articles that nobody would find on their social feed. You're just endlessly curious about that stuff. And you'll put me on, like, I mean, I remember you and I did a trip and we were there with Chris Durso, Robert Madu, and Rich Wilkerson long before anyone knew who those three were, right? You have an eye for spotting talent and leadership as it develops, finding you're what I would call a cross-disciplinary learner in the sense that you're very interested, whether it's neuroscience or business or arts or something, you'll just pull from a very eclectic range of things and say, here's some stuff you can learn. So if you're really interested in diversifying your sources, finding up and coming leaders, I don't know anyone who's quite got that. Rich Birch does that sometimes too, but my goodness, the way you do it, and I'm just excited that you're bringing that to the world. So are you going to vary the format then week to week? Like what is your full, because we hear from would-be podcasters all the time. So for all of you listening who are like, yeah, I want to do a podcast at some point, I want to hear your niche. Because we were talking before we started recording and you're like, well, the interview space is pretty full, right? Like it is. Look at this show. Here we are doing another interview, right?
Yeah, you're right. No, the interview space is full. I'm going to try to have some guest host on that I can ask, hey, what are you reading or what's interesting to you right now? What are you diving into? I might do a 10-minute or 12-minute guest interview once a month. So if you think about 4 shows a month, probably one of those would be, the top recommendations you need to be aware of with books and podcasts and events. Another show would be, let's unpack the young influencers list this month. The leaders you don't know about that you should. Let's maybe dive deep for 10 or 15 minutes with a guest. And then the fourth one might be a roundup of, here's some interesting articles that I came across, and I'm gonna share what I think. I'm also gonna do the leadership nuggets segment, Carey. And this is I'm pulling from Catalyst Podcast many moons ago, right? When Ken Coleman and I were on, and we would do this leadership nuggets segment, and it became really popular. And it was just me saying, hey, here's a thought that I have that I think will be helpful for you. But I'm gonna base it off of, again, an article or a video or a book or something that I can say, then I'm stirring up the conversation, but here's where you need to go now and actually dive into it for yourself. So similar to what you do with what you're thinking about at the end of the podcast. Yeah. So that's kind of the format at this point. We've got room to innovate and differentiate because it's brand new.
Right.
We're starting from scratch, but that's the thinking right now.
So shorter, eclectic, curating content. And I think curation, everybody, and for those of us who are content creators, let's riff on that for a little bit because there's so much pressure on social media, in the church, in business to produce content. But you've argued for years, and I agree with you, that curation is just as powerful as content production. Can you explain what you mean by that?
Yeah. In essence, what a curator is, it's somebody who filters through all of the broad category and says, this is what I've done all the research, and now this is what you need to be aware of. So think of the curator in a museum. They're bringing you the best art that they can.
They're not doing all the painting. They're not there from 6 a.m. till midnight painting, going, come look at my paintings. They're like, well, here's a Picasso. Here's a Van Gogh. Here is, whatever. That's the end of my art knowledge. But
no, that's good. I mean, that's a great example. So and this is a shift that we've been seeing in leadership for the last several years, which it went from, are you the expert, to are you aware of the experts, to now, like, you're the expert because you're aware of the experts.
Right.
So that shift happened. And now I wouldn't argue that we don't need experts, but I would argue that we need experts who know the experts. And there's equal amounts of power and credibility and influence in that. So you don't have to the pastors, you and David Kinnaman's been talking about this as well for a couple of years. The pastor doesn't necessarily have to create all the content. They can, but equally as much, you should be curating content for the people that you're trying to teach, and youth pastors especially. I mean, go help your students actually find the links. The 10 things they need to be reading this week, or that they should be watching this week. They're already there. They're already on YouTube. They're already on Instagram. They're already on Snapchat. They're already on all these outlets. So if you help them find the things there, compared to you thinking that you have to force them to come and only listen to you.
It's such a simple concept, but it's so hard for people. I was saying to a mutual friend last week, we were chatting on the phone, and I just said, it's rather ironic that one of the things I've become most known for is the forum in which I speak the least, which is this podcast.
Yes, because you're
right?
curating. You're curating with the podcast the best of long form interviews with leaders that we want to hear from, that we want to sit down and have lunch with. That's what you're doing. You're curating. Tim Ferriss, his 5-Bullet Friday. Yeah. That's a curation of the things that he wants people to be aware of.
He's got
Gary Vee.
A million.
He's been doing it forever. Seth Godin has been curating forever. Daniel Pink, James Clear. James Clear, he has a newsletter that he calls 321. Every Thursday, it's 321. And I can't remember what those categories are, but he's curating quotes, he's curating links, he's curating, things we need to read. And he obviously wrote Atomic Habits. Mm-hmm. Like, he's an expert. But he's not just sending you a newsletter on Thursdays saying, hey, read my book, Atomic Habits. He's actually pulling things from his world and saying, this is what you need to be aware of.
So I'm really looking forward to, and obviously the podcast is brand new. So I'm going to be a subscriber. I'm going to be a listener. But I'd love to know, what are the disciplines, the habits, and the rhythms that go into your curation? So how do you find these esoteric, interesting, fascinating, like, obviously you have to filter through a lot of stuff to get to the good stuff. So what does the life of Brad look like to be able to be a curator?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I compare it, I'm a sports nerd, so you may not get this reference because I know you don't necessarily keep up with all sports. There's a guy named Adam Schefter who works for ESPN, and Shefty is what they call him. And he's the go-to for ESPN when it comes to the NFL. Any news in the NFL, we're going to Shefty. He's got breaking news. And why he's such a powerful curator or analyst or reporter is he has sources. He has sources all over the NFL. He has general managers. He has head coaches.
So his phone's buzzing all the time going, hey, by the way, we're going to make a trade, right?
Exactly. And they now see him as their outlet for, if they want to get, news out, they'll send it to him. So, and this has been true in journalism forever, right? I mean, if you're a journalist, you understand this, but
you got a tip.
They built sources, and they've got all these incoming mediums or feeds by which then they're able to take a lot of stuff and pare it down, to what needs to be sent out then. So that's, for me, probably one of the things that I've built a system for, is I get tons of newsletters by email. I check tons of lists on a constant basis, and I've got sources all over the internet. I've got people I text. I've got people I call. Every conversation I have, I usually will ask somebody, hey, who's a young leader that you're really excited about in your world? So for me, it's intentionality at the end of the day, and it's now a system that feeds me lots of information. And a lot of those newsletters, I don't read all of them, but I just skim.
Mm-hmm.
I listen to tons of podcasts. I'm a podcast junkie, so I'm finding stuff all the time. And every time I find something, I write it down. That's the other key.
Yes.
Is if I don't capture it, then I won't remember it.
Yeah.
You got it. So I think that's the biggest reason for, again, and I'm a curious person in general, but the reason I can actually show up and have credibility is because I'm doing the work, but I'm not spending hours and hours and hours endlessly just looking at stuff, because that would be a waste of time. But I am intentional about certain areas of my life and being really clear on, I'm going to create as much input as possible that then I can pull from.
Well, and I would say, knowing you as I have for a number of years now, Brad, everybody has just a couple of superpowers. We're not great at everything, but what I see as a couple of your superpowers would be you're a connector. You just seem to know just about everybody, and you do a really good job handling those relationships. So if I need an introduction somewhere, I'll often text you. It's like, hey, do you know? And the answer is 99% of the time it's yes. And, you'll use that to help other people. You're also very, very curious. You're a magnificent question asker. I see that in you wherever we go. You're one of those guys, it's hard to get a word in edgewise, or ask you a question because you're always asking me or the other people in the room questions. I see that as a superpower, and you're a great note taker. Like when those emails come out or when we need sources, like you're like, oh, well, you should check this out. So if people are wondering, those are the things I see in you. Would you say you see yourself in that list, or are there other things that you do that you would say, no, I think this is part of it too?
No, thank you, by the way, for saying that, because that is what I'm trying to honor people with. And, I heard Jim Collins say, somebody was interviewing him and they said, okay, what's the thing that if you pare it all down that drives your engine, that drives your flywheel? That's Jim Collins speak, right? What is it? And he said, it's curiosity. He said, everything flows, my flywheel in my engine flows out of curiosity. I would say for me, it flows out of connection and being a connector. So all the things I get to be involved with, all the things I get to participate in, the organizations I get to help, the projects I get to work on, the places I get to show up, those are built out of my connection flywheel. And I look at it as, I want to bring people into my slipstream in order for me to build a tribe, as Seth Godin called it 12 years ago with his book, that then I can add value to and figure out ways that we can work together and help each other.
That's go ahead.
No, that is, and I can see that in my mind so clearly. And I just think, and this is true about whatever you're most gifted at. You see it so clearly that you think everybody else sees it the same way. And people say to me, I don't understand how you do it, Brad. And I look at it and go, well, for me, it's pretty simple because it's natural. It's the way I'm gifted. It's part of who I am. So I want to keep getting better at that, I guess is my point too. I don't want to just rest on, well, I'm a connector. I want to keep connecting. And at some point, does that run out? Probably not, because there's lots of people to continue to be connected to.
So most of the people listening to this podcast are younger than me, and many are younger than you are, even though you're probably a decade or so younger than I am. But you've been in a ton of green rooms, and you've hosted those green rooms, often for conferences you've led with 10, 20,000 people, in attendance, some of the biggest speakers in the leadership world, Christian and marketplace speakers. And I've watched you work those green rooms, and you're really interesting to watch because, we've all been in the place where you meet, a keynote speaker or you meet one of your idols or whatever. And it's hard not to get tongue-tied. It's hard not to be intimidated. It's hard not to just gush or just say predictable things. I mean, hey, you and I, a few years ago, we were in Washington, D.C. Remember meeting Morgan Freeman?
Oh, yes. That was a great evening, by the way.
That was a great evening. But what do you say when we're standing there in a reception room with 50 people and Morgan Freeman walks in and you're like, oh my goodness, that's actually Morgan Freeman. And I remember being like totally, I don't know why that just popped in my head, but like I was totally like tongue-tied. And you've been in that situation a billion times. It's like, Mr. Freeman, you make great movies. Like, what do you say to Morgan Freeman? It's like, you're the voice of God. My friend said you should have pulled out your phone and had him do your voicemail. I'm like, yes. But yeah, that's been done 1,000 times. But anyway, that was a great night. But, it's hard not to get tongue-tied. It's hard not to be a climber rather than a connector. Do you want to speak to young leaders about how you become a connector, not a climber, how you handle yourself in a situation like that? Because you've probably seen it go well, you've seen it go poorly.
Yeah. Again, this is such an important conversation.
Yeah.
I learned that from John Maxwell, working for John for a few years, because he called it climbers. The difference between a climber and I don't know if he used connector, but let's just use that example. It's the same between a connector and a networker. A networker is that person that you run from when you see them, because you know that they're just out for themselves and they want something from you. They're motivated by what they're going to get. They're transactional. They'll mask it with a connection or, hey, I want to add value, but at the end of the day, you just know. And we can think of people in our mind right now, probably as you're listening, you're like, oh yeah, that person they're a networker. And I don't mind them being in my world, but I don't necessarily want to hang out with them and invite them.
You're not calling them first for dinner when you're free, right?
You got it.
Yeah.
You got it.
Yeah.
The connector though, man, I think of them and I think, gosh, every time I'm around them, they make me better. Every time I call them or talk to them, they're giving more to me than I'm giving to them. There's a generosity. There's not a scarcity with a connector. There's a spirit of, I will succeed because you're actually succeeding. If I put these two people together, the power of that connection is going to be greater than the current connection, and I get to get out of the way. And when I smile, Carey, when you feel like you're winning or you're successful at being who you are, is when people say, gosh, Brad, you connected us 12 years ago. And now we're like working on this project together and, we've become great friends. And I don't need them to tell me that, or I don't need to be part of that. Right. That's the difference. It's so much more about the other person than it is about you. So I'll stop there.
No, that's a really good distinction. And you said something earlier I want to come back to, and you just slipped it in, so it might have gotten lost for a lot of listeners, but I picked it up, and you said, I want to add value. And I think back to some of the first times we met. I can't say exactly when it was. It might have been at a Catalyst when you were still running it. And I think I had just started blogging or something, and you were like so kind to me. And I left feeling like you were actually interested in me, which was a really, really interesting thing, because sometimes people don't always feel that way. Can you talk about how to add value to the relationships that leaders are making?
Yeah. Well, I do remember the first time we met. I think it was at a Catalyst event.
Yeah, I think it was. It was side stage. Yeah.
I knew who you were before you knew that I knew you.
Yeah.
Again, that's me, I would say, doing my job well, which is, if I'm leading Catalyst, I better be aware of the up and comers. And also I better be very clear that there is no distinction or no hierarchy between Andy Stanley or Craig Rochelle and the leader who nobody knows that showed up, and they're in a small community in Ohio, and they're at Catalyst, and they want to get better, but nobody knows who they are. I've got to see those two people, those two leaders the same way, because if I don't, then I can't expect our community to. And if I'm leading the community, then I've got to be the one who sets that example.
See, that's interesting. You're right. I hadn't thought about that until you said that. But I would say your world, and again, we've had years together now, is very flat. It's not that you dishonor the Andy Stanleys, the Craig Groeschels, the Seth Godins, the Daniel Pinks. You're very honoring to people, but you're just as honoring to the guy from Canada who can't even believe you know who he is, right? And that's a very... So it's flat in that sense. Not that you're trying to tear down the giants, but you're trying to give the same dignity that you would give a giant or a main stage speaker that you would to the guy who barely made the breakout, as a participant.
And I think the expectation, unfortunately, that we have with leaders, whoever is in the power circle, right? If we're not in that circle, we expect, unfortunately today, that those people who are in the power circle, the only way I can get their attention is to be in the power circle. And man, Danielle Strickland and many others who we all are friends with that would know, they just keep saying, and I just keep like raising the banner, like powerful people empower people. The powerful people, she said that on your interview with her, which is so powerful.
Danielle's so good at that.
If you have power, your job, the way you use that power correctly is you give it away. You empower other people who don't have it. So, and hello, like this is the life of Jesus. I mean, if I'm trying to be a Jesus follower, this is to me 101. So, unfortunately, though, so many times as leaders, we start to see through lenses. We have glasses on that are incorrect because somebody told us differently, or we watched somebody before us. We think this is the right thing to do. We get infatuated with the sizzle. And one of the things I always said at Catalyst, and I probably shared this before, but I always said, if I can't treat everybody the same and make them feel honored, then this community we're trying to build is not authentic. And I think people saw that. Like we didn't like put it on the screen and say, hey, everybody here, you're valued. But there was a sense of all those barriers were removed because we just wanted it to feel like this was all a bunch of friends hanging out together. And and that's again because we wanted that. Like we were the customers of our community we were building. So
what, for the leaders listening who are like, Brad, okay, I hear what you're saying. I can almost visualize it. But that is, I think for you, it might be natural. For a lot of people, it's learned. What are some things that leaders who empower other leaders or honor other leaders, regardless of their status or position, what are some best practices that the leaders who do that well do?
Yeah, well, you see people. I mean, practically, you see them and you acknowledge them. So this is part of having empathy. Is that if I'm standing in a circle at at some event and somebody is standing outside the circle, and all of us are having a conversation, I see this person and I say, "Hey, Joe, man, let me introduce you to all these folks here. I don't know if you know them. That's practical. Like you have to be an includer." And you have to make people feel comfortable, because I know when I'm not that way and I feel weird and it's awkward.
We've all stood outside that circle. Oh yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. I think encouraging people and actually like speaking well of people. So I do this with emails, and again, this is it's a habit for me that I like to do, is when I'm connecting people in email, I want them to get that email and like want to save it. Because I said things in that email that they're like, gosh, Brad, first, I didn't know you knew me that well. And second, thank you. That's really encouraging. And I'm actually like bragging about them to this other person. Right. And there's nothing wrong with if I just say, hey, Joe, meet Jim. You guys should work together. Thanks. See ya. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but I'm going to take the time to try to let me tell you about Joe. Joe is, man, he's he's such a great leader. Like his team loves him. He's got a real sense on him of being a visionary, like futurist, whatever it is. So I want to honor people by being able to say things about them and to them that will make them smile, but also the person who I'm connecting them to, actually they go, oh wow, that's powerful.
So I love angling that from, the young leader, the up and comer perspective. But how do you find seasoned leaders, the keynote speakers, the guys who are women who are on the main stage headlining things? How do they respond when you include someone new in the circle or introduce them to, someone who's not at that level? What are some of the best and perhaps the worst practices you've seen in that field? No naming names.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
That's an interesting question. So unpack that a little bit more.
Well, it's just, you have, in my experience, one of the questions is that I'll get doing this show, because we've had, 350 guests or whatever, is like, hey, what is so-and-so really like? And
gotcha.
9 times out of 10, 99 times out of 100, I'm able to say, actually, they're really great people. Like, it's kind of, and listen, I select for my guests. So if the guy really is a knob, I'm probably not going to have him on my show, right? Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm self-selecting. But my experience of most leaders has been surprisingly gracious and humble. But I just want to talk to people who maybe have influence, who retreat to the green room. They've got, they're not main staging it, but they're a big deal, big fish in a small pond or whatever. That can easily go to your head. And that's something I've had to guard against it. So when you're with the best of the best, how have you seen them respond when you kind of widen that circle and include somebody they don't know, or an attender, or, a guy from Canada? How do the best handle it? And what do you see?
Well, I think they handle it with, what you just said, which is humility and a posture of man, if I trust the person connecting me. So in this case, I trust Brad. And if he thinks I should connect with this person that I don't know, then I trust him. I trust his wisdom on that. And again, for me, that's equity that I have to trade appropriately.
Yes. You can't introduce everybody.
You got it. I don't introduce everybody. And I know certain people, and I won't name names, but I know that there are certain people who have a lot of influence, who are really, really well known. They don't want me to connect them to a lot of people, not because they're not interested, but I'm not adding value then.
Yeah.
If I'm creating distraction, or I'm like adding more to their world that doesn't allow them to do what they do really well. So that's back on me, Carey. Like, that's my responsibility to know what's appropriate, what actually works. How do I best honor both of these people in the best way possible? So sometimes it's, hey, listen, I'd love to connect you guys at some point. So really, what works best is probably the next time we're at an event together. Why don't we just find a time that I can introduce you then? Right. But it's not, I'm going to email you, or I'm going to text you both, or so it's. I have to be the again, the curator of my tribe and my community and my friends.
Yeah, because if you abuse that trust one too many times, it's going to be like, oh gosh, Brad is asking me to meet somebody I don't want to meet, and
you're done. It's stewardship. Like, this is equally as important, I think, but I'm biased. But it's equally as important as the way you steward your finances, or the way you steward your influence, the way you steward, the things you own, your home, your cars. Like, the relational equity you have with people is valuable. And if you don't steward that well, then you will find out pretty quick that it's not something that is going up in value. And
right.
Again, you can't use the excuse, well, I'm an introvert, I'm not people oriented, I don't really have an interest in in connecting people. That's just not me. Well, no, it is, because if you're a leader, which everybody listening to this is, then part of your responsibility is to figure out who the people are in your community, your congregation, your tribe, your circle, and then add value to them. So I want to find pastors, and we always are kind of looking for I would say like the trends in how we're seeing the world differently. But I want to
Yeah.
find those leaders and pastors who are equally as much connectors within their congregation as they are communicators. Because I would argue that that's equally as important. Given the circumstances you're in, given the environment you're in, are you actually like stewarding your people and connecting them and introducing them and actually know their names, and you're interacting with them and you're getting to know them, and that we can't just sit back and say, well, that's not my responsibility. But I think it is.
We've touched on live events, and meeting at a live event, Catalyst Conference would be a good example. But obviously, the disruption we're in the middle of right now with a pandemic has really changed the complexion of live events. Everything from sports to, school to concerts to obviously church services and gatherings of any kind. And already, I think pre-COVID, Brad, the model of live events was changing. You and I would often meet at live events, right? I'd like to pick your brain on where you think live events are going. And as much as we don't really know where all this is going to land, what are your thoughts about what the future of live events might hold?
Well, small, curated, smaller, invite only. I would say not smaller because there's not as many people necessarily, but smaller because you're pulling together a circle that wants to be in the same room. And room is in quotes, because room doesn't necessarily mean a room. But the difference of there's 10,000 people, at an event, at a leadership conference, compared to there's 1,000 who have been selected based on connections or level of influence. They all are thinking about the same things or interested in the same category. So that's where a lot of stuff was already going before COVID, is that it was going to be curated, smaller, influencer driven based on seasons of life or whatever. Now with the disruption, a lot of that is still true, but what you're seeing now is that I think that we're having to flip the model, where I'm starting with a few connections that perhaps will turn into some kind of community, and then might express at some point a conference outlet.
So don't try to build it big, start small and see if it grows organically.
Got
So
it.
when was Catalyst at its peak? Like how many people would you pack out an arena with? Like you would get what, 12,000?
Yeah, I mean, 12 or 13,000 in Atlanta, 3 or 4,000, in other venues across the country. The one-day events were, 2 or 3,000. So that was 2011, 12, I don't know, somewhere in the 10 years ago, 8 to 10 years ago range.
Which is really fascinating because I've thought about this a lot pre-COVID, and I haven't thought a lot about it in COVID because everybody's just kind of bouncing off the walls trying to figure out what day it is. But you can make the argument that was really before content became free and ubiquitous and easily accessed. In other words,
Yes.
Smartphones changed all that, right? You and I've had that conversation offline before. And so Catalyst was big in part because if you wanted to hear Seth Godin or see a human being shot out of a cannon,
Exactly.
which you did, or you wanted to hear the top thought leaders, the top preachers, you kind of had to jump on a plane and go to Atlanta, and getting the DVD 6 months later probably wasn't going to be the same as being in the room and connecting with people. Do you want to talk about the cultural evolution of content and live events as it sort of unfolded in your last years at Catalyst and then basically the last decade? Because I think there's huge learnings there for the future.
Sure. Well, if you think of music, let's just think about the music example for a minute. Forever there was these barriers to entry. You had the industry You had to have all these things in place to get a record deal. All that started to shift. We had Napster. We had the invention of iTunes. All those barriers went away. The middleman was removed. The power's in the consumer. I can now curate, or I can create my own playlist. That's a 40. I don't know. What would you say, Carey? 40-year shift, perhaps, in the last 30 or 40 years.
Mm-hmm.
That industry, music as one example, shifted from there was only places you could go to get that album to now it's available anytime, anywhere. The power is all in your hands as the consumer.
Oh, I mean, I think about that too, being the age I am. It's like if you had showed 15-year-old me who had to save up his allowance for a record, right, or a tape or a CD, that I would be able to get whatever song I want whenever I want it. I mean, you saved up, or otherwise you listened to that radio and hoped your favorite song would come on while you still had the radio on. And,
Exactly.
When I was in elementary school, we had those little tape recorders. I just put it right next to my radio and record a song, bootleg. And that's how you made your mixtapes, right? But it was a model based on scarcity. And if you look at it, live events were based on scarcity. It was like, if you want to hear Seth Godin, you better be at Catalyst. If you want to hear John Eldridge, you better be at Catalyst. You want to hear Andy Stanley give his annual leadership talk, you better be at Catalyst. And then around, you're right, 2011, it's like the iPhone was in its second or third iteration. Wi-Fi became ubiquitous. LTE was introduced so that you could actually stream video for the first time. Instagram, Twitter started to take off. Facebook really started to gain mainstream adoption. And then all of a sudden, content was everywhere, and you didn't charge for it anymore, right?
Right.
Like it was free.
Yes.
So it's I'm going to give you money.
You created a revenue model that was different. I think that's a distinction. So it felt free to me, but it wasn't free to the industry. Somebody was making money, or somebody was putting money in. There was an exchange happening, and so the same with events. You're right. All that was true. And here's what's not happening in terms of, do we want to gather anymore? The answer is yes. Like, we still want to gather. We still want to be in person. We still want to be part of something. The reason that, and I'm not arguing that events are going away. I am arguing that it better be distinct. It better have something on it. And I'm putting an asterisk as well, like a God-breathed movement. Many times is unexplainable, that we can't unpack and start to figure out, well, why did that happen? Because it's just God-breathed. But there are certain things now that are true. One of the things that was true in the last 7 or 8 years is so many churches started to do their own conferences.
Yeah.
Or organizations that have expertise. They said, we used to go to Catalyst, we would take our whole team, or we used to go to the Willow Creek or Global Leadership Summit, or we used to go to, name the conference. Now we are doing our own conference, and we're going to share about our expertise and the way we do church here, or the way we do ministry. And a lot of leaders are going to come because they're interested in that. That actually was a great disruption that made the world of live events better. Now, a lot of us who are in that space we were going, man, this is going to cannibalize us.
Yeah.
But I think in general, the overall, did that raise the level? Yes. So it just kept getting crowded. It kept getting more crowded. And now, the conferences that you and I would probably say yes to, if we just get invited, they're probably going to be, again, more invite only or curated. They're going to be probably, here's the question I get every time I'm trying to do a small gathering. What are we talking about? Who else is going to be there?
Yep.
Who else is going to be there is the biggest question. Because now the power is in, well, I want to learn from each other. We don't need that person doing that talk. We need the conversation to be the thing that draws us in.
I agree, because if I'm dialed in, I probably already heard you on that subject. What I want to do is I want to ask you the question behind the talk, right?
Yes.
Which is,
Yes.
if we're going to be in a room with Craig Rochelle, it's like, Craig, I've listened to your public talks and they're great. What I want to know is boom, boom, boom. So that's that smaller, curated room.
Yes.
That you and I have talked about this a lot, but access. I've heard you say Bob Goff changed the rules when he put his phone number in his first
Right.
book, right?
Yeah.
And you and I have debated that. I still keep my phone number a little bit quiet, just so that I can stay focused. But it's really interesting where I think what people want these days is access as opposed to just content. What does that mean for leaders, Brad?
Well, and by the way, it's what Kathy Heller said in your interview with her on a episode several episodes ago. She was talking about, the difference between the me joining a gym and me having a coach.
Mm-hmm.
Like I can watch every YouTube 20-minute workout on my computer
For free. You don't have to join a gym.
Why am I gonna join a gym? But the next level, why am I gonna have a coach? Well, because that's where the connection part and the uniqueness and the distinctness, and it's human, it's personal. Like you're actually like going on the journey with me. That's what we want. We don't want to go where, because again, all that used to not be available to us. Now I need people in my life who will actually help me get to the destination. So you were going to ask a question. Sorry.
No. I mean, this is what we do when we get together. So it's just fun. But you're right, because I look at my kids are in their 20s and, you're programmed to your defaults, and I might just as easily text you, hey, how do you, whereas my kids are like, well, there's YouTube and there's Google, and then you go a decade under them into the teen years or 20 years under them, just starting kindergarten. And those are kids who are never going to ask their parents and grandparents questions or advice because you just Google it, which is really interesting. And yet there is a level of, okay, well, I Googled it, but I still don't have meaning. I read the article, but I still want to know. I'm just thinking through the implications for businesses and churches as we go forward. What does that mean to our model? And I had mentioned Bob Goff's phone number. That kind of was probably where you're going back to.
Well, I think the thing that it does to the model is it's going to force all of us to think about engagement more, which you've been saying for many years. It's also going to force us to think, how do we make it personal?
Yeah.
The power of personal is such a part of the new expression of where we are in our culture. And if you think of Peloton as an example, what is Peloton trading? They're trading a couple of things. They're trading competition. Yep. The gaming idea, like I'm going to ride against that person from, California who I don't know, but, or we're going to ride against each other because in our company, we've got a company group on Peloton. They're trading community because they are building community. Yep. And they're trading courses. Like the idea that I'm progressing. Those 3 C's, community, competition, and course, I think that's where a lot of the future's headed, both for the business world, the marketplace, and the church. I think we've got to think about the worlds we're building, not just with those filters, but I think that's a pretty good filter right now.
Oh, that's really interesting. I've thought about that even for course development, because that's one thing that I offer. We have a half dozen courses that are available, and that is a purchase thing. But I've been thinking about walking people through a sequential journey. UK Cho would say, gamify it a little bit, right? Actionable gamification, which we'll link to his work on that, which is fascinating, the Octalysis framework. But this idea that, now you're at level 1. Oh, now you're at level 2. Now you're at level 3. Now you're at level 4, right? That because in that sea of information, it's so easy to get lost. And another thought, what you were saying too, I really think taking people behind the scenes is a huge value. Sometimes I'll get a guest who doesn't know the podcast particularly well, and they'll say, well, I always tell guests, hey, if you say something you don't like, I'll edit it out, no problem. But then I have some guests say, oh, well, you can edit out the parts you don't like. I'm like, no, I never edit the show. Like, I just don't. I can't think of, we're 350 episodes in. I just don't edit the show because I think one of the things that has made it resonate with leaders is it is unscripted. It is real. It kind of meanders at times and then you snap back. But that's what life is like, And
yes.
I think there is, sometimes we can be so glossy and so photoshopped and so polished and so filtered that people go, I don't even see myself in that. And I think if they hear the little turns and twists and the stumbles in a normal interview, they're like, oh, well, that would be the conversation I would have with Brad if I got the opportunity to sit down and spend a couple hours with you.
Yeah, I think it still goes back to that question of are we getting to the place where we trust that brand or we trust that that leader?
Yeah.
Are we do we trust that person? And what you're talking about, access, behind the scenes, unedited, that's all signs and breadcrumbs of, man, take us back to the trust factor.
Yeah.
Because we're so enamored or just, enveloped in a world where we don't trust anything anymore. I mean, we're fighting against all the things that are moving away from trust, and so that, I think that's a big part of it is once we find something that feels trustworthy, man, we're going to lean in.
Right.
We will follow that movement or that organization or that church or that nonprofit because they're so distinct today, which is unfortunate, but it's true.
Yeah, trust may be at least in our lifetime an all-time low. It's just so low right now. And transparency is your friend, right? Like the unpolished version sometimes is an asset. And I think that's good. I want to think about, okay, for yourself, you do a lot of consulting. You work with a lot of organizations since leaving Catalyst 5 or 6 years ago. You've founded Blink, which is Brad Lomenick Incorporated. Awesome. And
real innovative. Yeah.
Yeah, very innovative. But like everybody else, you haven't been able to get on airplanes very often in the last little while. And your work has changed. What do you think will be different in your life moving forward as you're pivoting your business model? We've talked about that a lot on the podcast this year, but it hasn't ended. I mean, we all thought we'd be back to normal by the fall of 2020. Not there. We don't know what it is going ahead. And this could be an indefinite period. I was in meetings this morning where we were plotting out, just plans for 2021. And I'm like, I think you got to do 2 plans. You got to do, this is how it's going to be. And then you got to be like, okay, maybe we can do in-person events again, but we really don't know. And what is going to be different for you moving forward? What are some things from the pandemic you're going to keep? And what are some things that you're like, oh man, I can't wait to get back?
The thing that I think will be easy to keep is what we talked about at the very beginning, which is the healthy rhythms. So, you and I both have had several conversations the last several months, and just that sense of almost like we're able to breathe, and the removal of, do we have to keep up with the busyness? Was a healthy new established rhythm that I don't want that to go away. Obviously with a lot of what I do, with organizations and helping them put on gatherings, a lot of that had to shift to digital. I'm very pro event. I'm very pro gathering. I think going forward, it's going to be a hybrid. So, is the event space going away? No. Is it going to be different? Yes. I think the idea that in the future, the home is going to be the epicenter of all things for life.
Agreed. The home is the new hub.
The home is the new hub, man. Quote that, tweet it, put it on your in your notes app. You don't have to agree with it yet, but that's a trend.
Oh,
and
yeah.
everybody who is thinking about trends in all categories of the world, they understand that. I mean, we've talked about the last mile on your podcast before. Everybody's fighting over the last mile to people's homes. Well, now it's a arms race to own the last mile into people's homes. And how many people are not going back to an office?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, half of the workforce.
I think that's a fair estimate. And there's like what the employers want, because now you're starting to get to employers are calling people back and workers are going, we don't want to go back. Right. And so it can move in multiple directions. And yeah, you think about five, I've been writing on this, but 5 or 6 things that have moved home. Shopping was home, but it really moved home. Food moved home. Yep. Like people who were eating out 15 times a week, all of a sudden we're eating at home 21 times a week. Entertainment moved home, direct to your house, bypassing the theater. Fitness moved home because gyms were closed. And school moved home. If we mentioned school, I don't know. And then there's church, maybe. Is church going to stay home? And so many church leaders are like, we don't like home. You just come back to our little facility and, we'll get as many of you in there. And I'm like, I think you're fighting gravity on that one.
Yeah. Here's where, to answer your question, I think the pivot for me, I've already been doing this, but I'm going to lean in more 2021, 2022 to actually putting on more smaller curated gatherings that will be attractive to the people I want to gather, but also will allow them to go, oh, thank you. Like I haven't traveled in 4 months, man. I'm ready to go, and let's get together in this location and let's have some fun together and let's connect. And I think people are going to be even hungrier for that. I don't think they'll necessarily be hungrier for, let's do a big conference with thousands of people and let's all sit in a room and listen to the same talks that I can listen to for free.
Right.
Online.
Mm-hmm. Or one that I already heard for free. Right.
Yes.
Yeah. Which is a real disappointment when you paid all that airfare. No, it's funny. You and I were talking about live events. You were helping our team think through some issues. And again, this was pre-COVID. It was in 2019. And one of the things I decided after thinking and praying about it for a while is, I don't want to be, and this is long before COVID, I don't want to be responsible for selling 1,000 tickets or 500 tickets or 5,000 tickets. That my meetings, and we haven't done it yet, we will when people are flying and there's a vaccine or whatever, are going to be 12 people or less sitting around a big green egg, having a conversation over a couple of days. I could get into that. All day long.
And here's the thing, Carey, like I know there's a leader or many leaders right now that are thinking, well, Carey, you can do that. You can do that because you've got, you got influence and people want you to come speak and there's leaders who would love to be coached by you. Yes, that's true. But it's true for them too.
It's 100% true for them.
You can have the same context of gather 10 other friends who are at other churches in the region for a dinner conversation. Talk about what you guys are learning. Again, that it's not just for us, it's for all of us. And we can all do that. And that's what we want to be part of. We want to have a dinner conversation. We want to be at the table. We want to sit around and listen to people and learn from them. That's the power of that. So it's equally as much your responsibility, all of the leaders who are watching and listening, as it is you and I.
One of the ideas you came up with when COVID hit that I've been sharing evangelically with as many people as will listen is, for those of you who are subscribers to the podcast, that we've got partners who've been very, very faithful in bringing you the show because obviously we have staff and, show notes and transcripts and the whole deal. So there are some costs associated with this. And our partners have been great. But of course, when the world collapsed, it was like, what do we do? And you came up with the idea. You said, Carey, you need to do a call every other week with our key partners. And you just need to let them know what you're working on and then just take questions. And so I've done, 12 of those calls in the last 6 months. And I didn't think anybody would come because you're asking like
Right.
leaders to come. I didn't think anybody would come. I thought they would not be interested in what I had to say. And I thought we'd invite 30 people and get 2. And man, those have been great. We're going to continue them. I may continue them in normal conditions. And I've been encouraging anybody who will listen to do the same. Can you talk about the idea behind that and the power of connecting people? Because again, that's a Zoom room with like 20 people in it, right? But
Yes.
it has been powerful for me, and much to my surprise, they have loved it. They've raved about it.
Well, these are leaders who they have an affinity for you. Like they see you as an expert, and they're obviously partnering with you on what you're creating.
Yeah.
So there's a natural built-in motivation there. But what happens so often is that what on the call you will spend a few minutes talking about something you've seen or you're learning, and then here's what you do, Carey. This is such an important lesson for all of us. Is you'll say, now, what do you all think? And then if you don't hear any responses, you'll say, hey, so and so, what do you think? Now, what's happening in that situation is you're honoring that person by saying you're an expert. I want to hear your thoughts, and the rest of the group wants to hear your thoughts, and we all are going to get better because this little circle of friends and influencers and leaders, we're gonna raise the level. So it's not about you like just getting them together and
doing my blurb for 40 minutes. They don't want to hear my blurb. No.
It's conversation, it's curation, it's you're the connector. Like, you are curious, you're pulling them in. And so again, here's an example. You're a local senior pastor in a community of 10,000 people, and you're thinking, gosh, everything's disrupted. Like, how do I lean into influence in my community? Well, how about you get some of the council members from the city and the mayor and the local school superintendent and the chief of police and the football coach of the high school and a few people who are in the business space, and you bring them together for a conversation. Because I'm guessing right now they're probably not getting together anywhere.
No,
and
nobody's convening that meeting, Brad. That's a brilliant idea.
And everybody's thinking, again, I know everybody's thinking, well, Brad, they won't even listen to me. Well, that's a whole other issue of why they will listen to you. But let's assume they will. Like, let's assume that they will say, wow, nobody's really gotten this group together. What are we doing? What are we talking about? Well, we're going to have a conversation about hope in our city. And it's not just for the Judd Wilhites of the world or the Craig Rochelles.
Yeah.
Because they're doing it, but it's for all of us, like the community of 10,000. You have way more influence, pastor and leader, than you think you do, to be able to impact people and bring them together. And every single season or sphere of influence that we have that's been given to us and we steward well is our responsibility. So quit thinking about, like, how am I going to get on stage at that thing, and start thinking about like, let me actually be a bridge builder in my local city of 5,000 or 2,500 or that. And there's opportunity there. I promise you, there's opportunity. It's a ripe market. It's a blue ocean, is what it is.
Mm-hmm. And I've been encouraging pastors to do the same with key volunteers and key donors. Just put a little Zoom call together. Do 5 minutes about here's what we know and here's what we don't know. Like, just be very transparent. I remember on one of the calls I did with our partners in the company on the podcast here, it was a time where we had done the free course, How to Lead Through Crisis, and nobody knew where the market was going. The stock market was still in the tank, and nobody knew what the economy would do. And I just said, here's our pivot plan for the next 30 days. And I just laid it out with them, and I said, we don't know whether this is going to work. Like, we just really don't. But this is what we're going to try. And there was so much synergy in the call around, oh, you don't know either, but this is what you're going to try. Now, it turned out our pivot went really well. And then we made another one, and it went really well. But I was just sharing that with them in real time and saying, here's what we know, here's what we don't know, here's what we're going to try. What are you guys trying? And, if you get some key volunteers and some of your top donors, because you can't, even if you're regathering in person, some of your key people just aren't going to be around for a while, but it makes them feel connected. And so one of the leaders I gave that advice to actually took me up on my advice and put one of those calls together. It's an organization that we give to. And to be a participant in that call was awesome. It was just great. There's a sense of connection that comes from that. So that's one really hyper practical idea. And here's how complicated it is. You invite 12 to 20 people to a Zoom call, even if you can't gather safely. And you don't talk a lot. You just share what you know and what you don't know, and you throw it open and you cap it at 40 minutes, 45 minutes.
That's it. I love it. I'll give you another practical thing too, just for many listeners are pastors and you're not gathering in person on a Sunday. And I don't know what you're doing throughout the week, but I would say this. We think back to what we just talked about. The home is becoming the epicenter for work, especially.
Yeah.
There's thousands of people in your city or your community that need a place to gather, maybe once a week with their team that's virtual now, or that might, not be in an office. Open up your church. Like, you have a building, you have real estate, you have actually like meeting space that people would love to potentially use for gathering their team for a staff meeting. It's such a ripe opportunity right now for you to actually engage the community. Now, many of you may say, well, we're already doing tons of stuff throughout the week. Great. Keep doing that. But most of us, if we're thinking about, well, what are we doing Monday through Friday right now? Well, nobody's really showing up. I mean, safely and appropriately open up your church, because there are tons and tons and tons and tons of business people who would love to have a place. Has caused many people who are working from home to not have a place that they can gather 5 or 6 people, and they don't want to go to Starbucks right now. So why not go to your church?
Yeah, and I think there can be a temptation to just add another little editorial comment to think if you've got 30 or 40% of your old attendance back, that everybody's back. Trust me, they're not back. You have so many people that you haven't seen, that you're not connecting with, who are there. They're the people who show up in Google Analytics. They're the people who show up on your YouTube count. And if you think you're connecting with them, I promise you, you're not. And you almost cannot over-connect in this time of disconnection. Brad, man, I can't believe how quickly time has gone. Any other trends you're seeing? You're one of my favorite trend watchers, and you always come up with stuff because of your curation habits that a lot of other leaders don't see. What else do you think is going to be different, or what might be the same when things stabilize?
Yeah, well, I'll give you a few to think about. Hopefully these will be helpful. I mean, the micro influencer it is way more valued right now than the macro influencer. And this is if you think about the marketing world, and even going back to Fire Festival, that was a total. We all saw that on Netflix. But a lot of brands have shifted to seeing the micro influencer as the real carrier of influence and power, and the ability to sort of third party endorse things. So that's an interesting trend. The micro school is also another one.
Yeah.
Now this is because of COVID.
Right. But those
seeing
idea of pods and like parents who are gathering together to do collective homeschooling. Yeah.
Yeah, think 20 parents in a neighborhood or in a community, and now they're going to go hire their own teacher.
Right. Yeah.
That is, I mean, it may be a fad, but I think it's moving in the same direction as power. The epicenter is the home.
Yeah.
And we're removing the industry, whatever that looks like, the big bureaucracy, and we're taking back sort of the power for us to actually curate and develop and build what we want to actually build. And I so if we call it, what does Levi call it? He calls it their
watch parties,
home circles, or watch parties. Sorry, thank you. Yeah, mean, that just seems to be where some of the energy is headed. Obviously in the real estate world, mergers, acquisitions, all of that's going to happen in a rapid pace,
right?
Because of everybody like wanting to get rid of their office space. There's going to be a lot of real estate available, and I still will go back to the trend of, I saw that is the recent research from Barna that 1 out of 5 churches may not make it.
Yeah.
Is that
20%. I haven't checked in the last few weeks, but yeah, it's around 20% thinking they may not make it.
Which is devastating. At the same, and with that, the question of what happens to that property, what happens to the real estate?
Yeah.
So can we create a merger and acquisition mindset that says you're struggling? What if we take your real estate and we combine it with this church planter's incredible sense of momentum and vision and energy and lots of people that are aggregating around it, and we put those together? What happens then? So I think that's going to happen more and more. I mean, Warren Bird's been writing about this for a while.
Yeah, and by the time this airs, they will have had an episode out on this show several weeks ago, so you can go back and see that where we talk about just that. Yep.
So
those are great trends.
Those are a few. I mean, I would still go back to this one, Carey, and I think I just want to continue to harp on this. Like, as a local leader in your community right now, the question you might need to be wrestling with, or at least have at the sort of the forefront of your thinking, especially with local officials and people who are in charge, is one: how can I serve you, and how can we partner to actually make an impact here locally in our city or in our community, in our neighborhood? And don't get so wrapped up with all the stuff that feels like it's depressing at a national, international level. And it is. I mean, it
is depressing. Yeah, I have to turn off the news sometimes.
But there's so much opportunity, I think. If I'm viewing the landscape and saying, where should I invest time, energy, resources? It's local. Like, get involved locally. Like, make a difference locally. Partner with your local officials. Figure out ways to partner with your schools. Like, don't get so distracted by all the other stuff that is sideways energy. And you have the ability, again, to make a difference, like, in your city, because you're an influencer. Mm-hmm. You may not be able to have an opportunity to have hundreds of thousands of people listen to your podcast, but you can make a difference in your city. So
yeah, nobody should be able to out-local the local church, right?
There you go. Man, tweet that.
Well, I think leaders who may not have known you before, and there would be a handful of them, know why I love Brad Lomenick so much now. And congrats on the new podcast, H3 Leadership. You can get it on all the channels. And anything else you want to say about the podcast? But you will be giving this in little bite-sized pieces as opposed to an hour and 19 minutes of conversation.
Yes. I would say a lot of the things you and I have been bantering about for the last hour will be what you can expect.
Yeah.
And as well, there will be tangible links and resources and things to recommend that you can go purchase or download or look up on Google that day, and hopefully will help you.
Yeah, you're doing show notes, aren't you, for the podcast?
Oh, definitely, absolutely.
Yeah. So it's not just you have to be driving along trying to take notes and getting tickets or going to jail. It's like there'll be show notes and all that will be along with the podcast.
Yes, you will probably find the show notes to be the fast forwarded version, and the if you're looking for a quick version, to go find those same things. But at the same time, I want you to be a part of the conversation, because hopefully there'll be some value in that as well.
Well, Aaron Ward, who runs our little podcast here, this one, is also in charge of the Thrivicity network. So right now we have 2 podcasts on the Thrivicity network. So that'll grow over the next few years, but woohoo, here we go.
That makes it a network when you got 2, right?
That's right. Big time, man. Big time. Anyway, Brad, it's been a joy. Hey, where can they find you? What website online for your podcast and for all things Brad Lomenick?
Yeah. Well, all things for me, it's just my first and last name, Brad Lomenick, on all the outlets. Mm-hmm. And I do have a website by that same name, but h3leadership.com.
Is where they'll find the podcast and the show
that'll
notes.
Get you to the podcast and show notes. So just go there. That's easy, h3leadership.com. Thanks, Carey, for, again, all you have done. You are in the ears of hundreds of thousands of leaders. And same with me. I mean, I listen to the show. Now I'm part of the team and I'm helping you on some stuff. But I listen to the show every week.
Man.
And you are bringing such like perspective and insight, the way you ask questions, the things I get out of it. I have to stop. You frustrate me because I have to stop a lot on my run and actually like write down stuff on my.
Well, we have show notes, Brad. I don't know whether you know that or not, but we do show notes and transcripts as well. So
there's something about when I can actually capture it, though. It feels more important when I actually write it in my notes app. Yeah. But you disrupted my run many times because I'm stopping to not only write things down, but sometimes I'm stopping to pray or to like just have to think about it because it's challenging me or, you've hit a nerve or so anyway, thank you for what you do.
Well, I appreciate it. Do you have this with podcasts? I put it out to listeners too. You can leave a comment in the show notes or YouTube or wherever you happen to be catching this. But there are times where I find, because a lot of us listen to shows while we are doing something else, cycling or whatever, but I'll be mowing the lawn and I'll come around the corner of the house and I'll remember when Tim Ferriss said, or Craig Rochelle said, or Andy Stanley said, and I'm like, oh, that's where I heard that idea. It's very geo-specific. Do you have that too?
Absolutely. There is, yes. There's something about like the journey of listening and learning.
Yeah.
That you mark. I think our unconscious minds, we mark that moment and we can remember it. I mean, I can remember, running a few years ago in Atlanta and I was listening. I don't remember what I was listening to, but It was a podcast and there was this thought that I think like the Holy Spirit just sort of downloaded to me and I actually wrote a song. Like I stopped and sat down for 30 minutes. And I'm not a songwriter, but I wrote this song that still hasn't gone anywhere. But that's a moment. Like that was a moment, and I know exactly like where I was. It's powerful. Like those they're like mile markers on the interstate.
Yeah, I've had a few of those as well, and that's really interesting. So I love this new form. It's been around for a decade and a half, but it's finally going mainstream and really glad that you're adding your voice to it. So I will be a listener, a subscriber, h3leadership.com. Brad, what a joy, as always. Won't be your last time. So thanks so much for being with us and building in so many leaders, adding so much value to my life and the lives of so many other people. I think a lot of you who don't know Brad well have no idea how much this guy does in the background to make so much run, including our little company. So thank you, Brad.
Thanks for having me on, Carey. Always honored to be a part.
Well, I hope today's episode was helpful to you. You can always get more by subscribing to my channel. I also have a lot more content over at CareyNieuwhof.com for leaders in business and leaders in churches. And you can get transcripts of this episode there and so much more, plus some other stuff I do for leaders. So head on over there to discover more at CareyNieuwhof.com. And in the meantime, I really hope our time together today has helped you lead like never before.